being the beginning of somebody's life together. Occasionally I get to sneak in and listen to the vows, and that's always such a blessing. I'll never forget one of my favorite grooms said, "You are the dream I didn't know to dream." That's remained with me. People are in our building starting their lives together. There's nothing better.
We document and share best practices around owning, operating, and managing world-class wedding venues.
Brenda Baker, thank you so much for being here. I am really excited to chat about your venue and just learn a little bit more about you. Thank you so much. Welcome to the Venue RX.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
This is going to be an awesome conversation. You are in Texas, which is my favorite state, born and raised there. And tell me what part of Texas you're located in.
We're in North Texas, north of Dallas, in horse country, out in the country for sure. So, but it's about a 45-minute drive. So we're not so far out that we're not accessible.
Yeah, and totally. One of the venues we manage is an hour away from San Diego. I feel like 45 minutes, totally doable. You're 45 minutes from Dallas?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Just straight up the tollway.
Very cool. Very cool. Tell me a little bit about your background. Before we get into your venue, tell me a bit about your background and how you got in this industry first, and then why owning a venue versus coordinating weddings or something else.
Well, I spent 25 years as an interior designer. Working for builders, helping high-end clients do all their selections for their brand new homes. And then also I owned a remodeling company. And my husband was in corporate development. And on the side, I also, because I love flowers, I did a bunch of flowers. And friends would ask me if I would do flowers for their weddings or their daughters' weddings. Or before I knew it, was sort of like a little side gig. And I was in and out of a whole bunch of venues. And I would always come home and tell my husband, "Oh my gosh, it was a beautiful venue, but I wish they would have, or if they only could have, or I can't believe they don't have a groom suite," or, all the little things that just as an outsider, you're wishing for that venue. And my husband and I got to the point where we were looking at our lives saying we've got 10 years of work life left. What do we want to do? And we really have always desired to work together and do something creative together. And so for several years, we kind of started praying about it and pushing doors out to see where that might open. Somewhere in there, our youngest daughter got married, and we were standing there looking at the venue thinking, wow, this might meet some of the things that we're looking for. We want to serve the Lord. We want to love people. We want to do something creative together. And what does that look like? And so I kind of remember the day that our big beams of our barn venue were going up thinking, oh my gosh, this is really happening. And so that's sort of, I guess, the beginning of how it happened in the short version.
Totally. That's amazing. I find that your skill set is, I think, at this really cool intersection of, some of the real estate experience with designing and working with builders, you said, right? And then your husband with corporate development. So there's a lot of things that go into building not only a building, but then a successful business as well, it sounds like.
Right. One of the things that is a little bit more difficult is being married partners. And both of us were bosses in our own right. And so we've really had to learn kind of a new conversation of how to work together and how to make decisions. And I think ultimately that makes us better because we're learning along the way too, but we're trying to hone those skills as well.
I was just talking with a venue owner who's been in the industry for 30 plus years. Her family's been in the industry for a while. Her name's Tirza, and she was like, we should have a podcast that just talks about the husband and wife, like when there's a husband and wife dynamic in the business ownership, because You're right. And I work with my wife, and I know it's the best, and sometimes it can also be frustrating, but it is very rewarding as well. If you wouldn't mind, tell me a little bit about that. What were maybe some of the initial conversations that you had to have? What was there? Did you just start without having an initial conversation, and then you hit a couple of roadblocks and you said, okay, we need to figure this out? Or how did you approach that?
Yeah. So I don't even know if we knew what questions to ask. Like we have certain roles in our marriage. I mean, we've been married almost 38 years. So we had, different roles. I think we'd never really come across each other as bosses before, and so we got into situations where we had to decide how we're going to solve a problem, and both of us, and we had disagreements, so we had to kind of figure out how to work through those. And I think currently we kind of have set up lanes that we stay in. And I think that's been really healthy, giving each other autonomy to make decisions, and trust in those specific lanes too.
That's wonderful. If you're talking to a new venue owner, say it's a couple, say they have a dream similar to what you and your husband had of maybe working together, do you have, as a couple who have worked together, do you have some words of wisdom for maybe a new couple who are going to embark on a journey of venue ownership together?
Yeah, I think you have to all the time remind yourself at how skilled and capable your partner is. I think you have to continue to look at them with eyes of admiration, and instead of critical viewing. I think you have to always look at them with the ways that they're gifted and talented, and allow that to happen. Though anytime you try to get your fingers in where your partner is gifted, then that's tough. And so respect, admiration, those things, you have to look at your partner that way in order to make it work. There's so much that you have to accomplish. You don't have time to pick and tick and tear down. You constantly have to build them up and move forward.
Piggybacking off that, if you and I are the other sides of our better halves, right? Like if we are the other part of that, how do we get better? How do you make sure that you're constantly being a better partner?
Well, we visited a little bit earlier about education. I'm constantly trying to improve in my role and my lane. I'm learning all the time. I'm taking every chance to take a webinar or talk to someone new, or I'm constantly trying to be better in the role that I've been given, and then offering to be helpful in the other role without directing. And sometimes that's hard, just to be helpful without offering an opinion.
That's wonderful. That's such great advice. And I mean, it's a little bit of a diversion from, talking specifically about your venue, but I think there's so many couples that work together, and, we probably hurt ourselves more with poor decisions, in how we treat each other than we do a decision that can be made and then quickly switched over in the business, right?
So, and we share enough stress, and we don't get the opportunity that we did in separate locations to one person carry the stress at some points and the other person carry their stress. It's all when you're stressed, it's together. And so I think that's just something that you don't always know in advance, that it's going to be a stress together, not alternating.
Yeah, that resonates so much. Well, let's dive into your venue a little bit more. So you're located northern Dallas area. How you mentioned the big beams of your venue, and I have your website pulled up here. I was reviewing it in preparation for the show. Describe, especially because some of our listeners are just listening, right? Not online. Describe your venue for us. What does it look like?
Well, it is a barn venue. I always kind of hesitate to use that word. We're not rustic. We're I say we're Scandinavian in the sense that we've tried to be middle ground. We've tried to be beautiful, but something that the bride can walk into and make her own. And so we aren't considered similar to what a normal barn would be considered. We're white. It's a wide open. Our Great Hall has 45-foot ceilings. We're a large venue. We can hold 350 people with a dance floor. And so it's white and pretty fresh. So
that's so cool. And I would highly recommend everyone go look at the site. We're going to put the link to the site in the description of both podcasts and YouTube. So check out the site. What influenced the design of the venue? Because you have this design background, you have this interior design, you've worked with so many of these different projects. Were there a couple of key things that influenced the direction that you went with this project?
Well, definitely. And my experience in the flower industry really helped me take a look at other venues. So just like anytime you build, whether it's a house or if you're a commercial developer and you're building an office building, you write down all the things that you want, all the items, the way things flow, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of funny when I tour, I always show the women's bathroom because I always had this pet peeve of women standing in line out in the hall waiting for the bathroom. And I said, I know it's weird to show up a women's bathroom, but it's big. There's plenty of space in there. And so I think we had a list of things that were must-haves in that. And then we tried to put it together in a space that makes sense. Flow of people. Our halls are wide. Our kitchen has a back hallway, so staff doesn't have to negotiate guests. There's just the list of items that you put together that you want to see when that happens. So, and I don't know that we would have chosen to do a barn, except for the fact that we wanted that wide open space, kind of that cathedral feel without it being a church.
Could you walk me through the process that it took from kind of inception, design, to, permitting, the construction, to your first event? Like, how long did that timeline take? And maybe what were some of the challenges that you faced along that road?
Well, our professional design actually started on a napkin when my husband and I were having breakfast together.
I love it.
That's where it started. And it started with not fully agreeing about what it was going to look like or be like. But then we did go on and hire an architect that could help us, especially with the space planning, et cetera. Even though we both have backgrounds in that, it was very necessary. And then, of course, we had to have professional plans when we went for permits. We are in the county, so we went through the county in terms of building. I would say that Denton County is a lot more strict. I know it is, based on my conversations with other venue owners. So it was almost like we were in the city. We had, multiple permits, styles, inspections, all that kind of gear. So
for that,
and then.
Well, and help me understand really quick the length of time that some of those permits took. Is this months and months? Was this weeks for each permit? What was kind of the timeline for that?
Yeah, so the way that Denton County does it, you submit a packet and then they run through it and they give you the packet back. So once that initial permitting process was done, then we didn't have to apply for any more permits. We just had to request inspections. So I would say that probably took 3 months, 2 to 3 months for the permitting. And we went ahead and began construction right up until we needed the first inspection.
I've heard this from different counties as well, and I know everyone's experience is different because the counties are different and the different structures and ways that things are set up, but they hand you the packet, right? And then you have a checklist of things you need to do. Oftentimes it's getting the inspection scheduled that takes the longest time. Does that resonate with your experience?
Well, yeah, and sometimes, and we did run into this where the inspector wanted something, maybe it was a new inspector, and he wanted something that wasn't possible. It wasn't possible to do. And so we ran into that a couple of times too. In fact, 2 weeks before we were supposed to open, the fire marshal wanted something from the electrical company that they've never done in the state of Texas before. And they, apart from our project, had this whole disagreement, which stopped our construction and made it almost impossible to open on our very first wedding. So there are things that happen throughout the whole process that are way out of your control, and you just have to roll with that. And I would say we because we've both been in the construction process, gave ourselves margins, but those were quickly used up again with things that aren't in our control. So it's part of it.
If you were giving advice to someone who is just starting this process, what kind of margin would you give yourself, either a financial buffer or even a time buffer to kind of weather some of these storms? Potentially, yeah, right, you never know, but what would your advice be?
I would say you need a timeline, and then you need to add 4 to 6 months is what I would say if you're doing a timeline. And for financially, it's so funny when I would work with couples on building their home, I'd always say, have your budget and then add 20% for, issues and all that kind of stuff. And I would say there's probably 20 to 25% that you need to hold back for things you don't know about.
Understood. So if you're getting a loan, if you're saving, regardless of what it is, you need to make sure that you're holding 20% of your overall budget to cover incidentals, extended timelines on certain things. Okay.
Right. And at the end of the day, if you don't end up using it, you may need it for cash flow within your first year anyway. So it's not going to be a misnomer to hold on to that.
Yeah, makes total sense. Let's dive into the actual venue itself. When someone gets married there, how did you set it up? I mean, you can have all-inclusive, you can have blank canvas, you can do preferred vendor relationships. There are all these different ways to have a wedding venue, right? What were the things that informed the decisions that you made about how you started?
Well, we did some market surveys. I talked to other venues in the area. My daughters at the time were in that age group, and so we had some discussions with them as well. My husband and I really did not want to have in-house catering. We didn't want to build that style of a kitchen and spend the money on it, and B, we just weren't interested in doing it that way. So we knew right away that would be a vendor. From our survey, it sounded to us like most brides that we had a conversation with wanted to choose their own vendors. And that was part of our overarching concept anyway, with the way that we built the barn, is we wanted them to be able to claim it. We want it to look like them. We want it to smell like them. We want them to have their own kind of food and transform that space into their personal event. And so that was really important to us. The other important thing is that the vendors have just as good of an experience with us as the bridal couple. And so we immediately went about trying to forge relationships with vendors. And we get a lot of vendors that come and want to work with us or be on a list or whatever. We don't have preferred vendors. We have a list of people that we work with quite frequently. And we like, but we're always open to meeting new people as well.
Very cool. Do you, what were some misconceptions maybe you had, or things that you started in the first, couple months that you quickly decided, okay, actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to pivot?
Well, we don't. We do have a preferred vendors list for bar.
Okay.
We learned very quickly that Uncle Joe might mix a good drink, but he's not a good bar manager. So that is one thing we learned very quickly about the difference between bartending and bar managing. And so we did hone in on that. We also have our own personal security. We used a security group that hired a bunch of off-duty police officers, et cetera. And we had we never knew who was coming, for one thing. And then second of all, we had the fire marshal from Dallas show up in full flak, guns, stood by the bar, very tough looking. And I immediately was like, we're about safety. We're not about policing, right? So we quickly changed that to wanting to know who it is and who's coming, and being able to forge a relationship, like I said before, so that it's the same vibe all the way through our vendors.
That makes a lot of sense. I had a question for you about the bar manager versus the bartender comment that you made. Do you do bar in-house? Like, do you have your liquor license and you supply the bartender and the bar manager?
The couple can bring in their own alcohol. They have to pick from 4 of our bar companies. So they still get a selection. You buy with different people. And so they can interview and select, but it has to be one of the 4. And the great thing about that is we know them personally. The same bartenders from each company come. So we know them by name, and they know what our expectations are. And we, as companies, have pretty much the same policies in terms of alcohol, no shots, all the things that it's really out of protection for people, et cetera. So it's a type of management that we appreciate.
So Brenda, we've talked about bar, talked about some of the process that it took to actually build the venue. What did you do as far as tables, chairs, decorations, some of the things like that? How did you kind of get the inspiration for that? And then what were the practical steps you took to furnishing the venue?
Right. So, again, I had been in several venues, multiple venues. We had experience with 2 of our daughters getting married, and we quickly knew which tables would be our favorites. So we chose the farm tables. I know in some venues those are upgrades or upcharges, and that's kind of not, we just didn't want to nickel and dime people. And so we chose farm tables and then the wooden crossback chairs, just part of the aesthetic, so that when you set up a room, it looked very consistent. And I researched, interesting thing about buying large amounts is that you have to not only price per piece, but then there's always some kind of delivery fee and a fee. And so you really have to take it all the way down to the final price. You can't just look at the price per chair, et cetera, which that was something I wasn't used to doing. I had never bought 300 chairs before. So you just kind of have to take it down to the end to really do your search.
You mentioned 300 chairs. Do you have separate sets of chairs for ceremony and the reception area?
That's a great question. We have benches for outdoor ceremony space. And so we can seat 300, but they're just benches. They're wooden benches outside. And then the wooden crossback chairs are for the inside.
That makes a lot of sense. The crossback chairs are really beautiful. We have
they are
crossbacks at some of our venues, but then we have the white folding, like the white resin folding chairs at some of the other ones, and those ones are definitely like, you can't even compare. I think the beauty of the other ones, it ends up really creating an elevated look.
Yeah, we have a small venue, and those are actually white metal stackable chairs. just because it's small, but they're twice as heavy, pretty sure.
Yeah.
When you're trying to, and again, that's not something that you know about when you're first starting. And same with our tables, the legs fold in so they all can be placed in a closet, but they're very, very heavy. They're very hard to manage. And so just again, learn by experience.
Totally. Or learn by listening to the podcast, because literally that I'm smiling because I've carried so many of those tables. And if you're carrying them with someone else, that's great. If you're there and you're doing the wrap up by yourself, which I've done before, I mean, that's heavy. You could throw your back out. You could get, injured pretty easily
we put them on our Baroli carts now, just like our chairs, because it's worthy of saving your back and your muscles for sure.
Totally.
And we used to do all that ourselves. When we first opened, we did all of that. So.
Well, and I was going to ask, so what did you start with as far as a team goes? And then what do you have now as far as a team goes?
Well, it was just Bud and I, just my husband and I. That was our team. And we did everything. We cleaned, we set up the events, we tore down the events, we booked, we marketed, we mowed the lawn. We did it all to begin with. And then our next hire was a venue manager. She's really in charge of bridal care and sales. The best thing we ever did. She had 10 years of experience and really has done so great. Ross Perot is famous for saying to know your weaknesses and hire to them. And I really feel like that was a great addition to our team. We also have a cleaning crew that are wonderful. They come in at night and clean the venue. And then we hire part-time work for mowing, trash, if we have to flip the space, and for setup. So,
are those team positions difficult to hire for because it's sometimes can be a seasonal position depending on your venue?
It is. Specifically the setup and mowing folks are tough to keep and to hire. We have gotten we have been very blessed. Local veterinarian has some help, and those guys will come over after they get done there and work in the evenings for us. So we've been very lucky in that regard.
That's awesome. I think you touched on a really good point that I don't think is something that I've said or we've talked about on the podcast before, but that is a great way to find extra part-time help, to go look at surrounding businesses. And if people are already going to be working in a specific location, especially given the fact that oftentimes venues are a little bit out of town, if you can find a business close by that has someone who's a part-time worker, but then they're willing to come in and put a couple of hours in the evening or in the morning before their shift to set up or tear down chairs or whatever, that's a great way to not have to bear the full burden of employing that person.
And I think when we first started too, we talked to a couple neighbors who needed part-time ranch hands. And so we got together and shared some people that way too. Because they didn't need anybody full-time either. So, I think any way that you can partner with other businesses for that kind of staff, it's a good deal.
That's awesome. Very cool. You mentioned marketing before. We kind of went a little bit of a reverse direction. We talked about, your operations side first, but for marketing, what did you start with? Where was your kind of launching point with marketing? And then after we get through that, I want to ask where you're at now, what you're doing now.
Okay. When we were under construction, I started with Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and then we are members of the Knot and Google Ads. This year we added, and they've been a great friend to us in terms of marketing as well. And then I picked up a scheduler. I use Hootsuite for scheduling, and just some things like that you just learn along the way what's going to work for you.
When you looked at these tools, you mentioned HubSpot, which is a fantastic tool, Hootsuite, another great tool. Are these things stuff that you're just doing your own research on? Did you talk to mentors or other people who are already in the industry or in digital marketing to kind of help? How did you hear about some of these?
I did a lot of research on my own, and then I talked to people not even necessarily within our industry, friends, all sorts of people that had their own business, and I just did a lot of research. And I had to find something that was pretty simple to understand. And I share with you, I didn't grow up with digital anything, and so it's a big learning curve. I was totally in to learn it, but it's kind of a slow burn. So I researched everything before I went into it, and that's where we're at. And then I use HoneyBook for our CRS.
Yeah. Yep. The CRM system for, we use HoneyBook across our companies as well. And we like it quite a bit because it kind of hits the sweet spot of price with some of the features. I think it could be more expensive and they could offer more features, but I know they're evolving as a company as well. So I have a lot of.
It's been kind of fun to watch them grow. Actually, they're growing with us. I feel like I wish I was more adept. I think I could use it better than I do. But yeah, I'm very satisfied with them.
Very cool. Help me understand a little bit more about your venue. You said, for up to 300 guests, it's fairly blank canvas. They can bring their own vendors in and caterers and things like that. Tell me a little bit more about it from the standpoint of do you require insurance? We talked about bar a little bit. Give me some of those other pieces as far as what the experience is like getting married at the property.
Yeah, we do. We do require for them to purchase liability insurance, and that is for them. That doesn't have anything to do with us. That's if somebody left their event and caused an accident and they were going to come back and sue everybody. We're covered, the bar's covered, but that young couple not covered. And homeowners insurance doesn't cover them either. And so we just, for a fraction of what they're going to spend on their day, we just feel like it's important for them to have that insurance. And then they get to come in. Our hours from 10 a.m. to midnight, although we do allow hair and makeup to come in sooner. I had 3 daughters, so I know what it takes to get everybody ready for that. And they have access to our venue, the 11 acres, inside and out. And we do our best. We have a concierge on site the whole time. And so we try to be stealth in solving problems behind the scenes, if there are any, and make the day the best possible.
That's incredible. That's a generous amount of time for property access, and then especially the whole property. Do you mind, and totally fine if you don't feel comfortable sharing, but do you, what is your pricing range, if someone is going to rent the venue for that time period?
Yeah, so we have, it's seasonal and day a week and all that, but it's somewhere between 6,000 and high season is over 10,000.
Got it.
A day. So yeah.
Really cool. When you were thinking about pricing, that's always a tough one. How do you price? How do you break down? What's the comps in the area? And if depending on how close the next nearest venue is, there's always a thing of price shopping and some of those different things.
Oh, for sure.
How did you come to that pricing point? Did you start lower and then raise it quickly? What was your journey like through the pricing discussion?
Well, took a look at the real expensive venues that are around and some of the least expensive, and we wanted to kind of hit somewhere in there. We didn't want to be the most expensive as well. And I think we wanted to value ourselves in a certain way. We're targeting a certain bride and that might want to do some creative things for herself, but for the most part, it's going to hire everything else done. And so we tried to price it in that way. And we're not going to be in the affordable category or the budget category, but we're not high priced either.
What does that range look like for your area? Like what is low and then what is, super high?
I think 3,500 is one of the lower price venues in the area. It's a very nice venue. They have shorter hours, and they do things like they have round tables, that are easily moved, and their staff does a lot of the things because so many of the things are a little bit easier than some of the things at our venue. And then high end is around 16,000
per day.
Yeah. And then we also have another large wedding company that has significant number of venues here in Texas. And they are an all-inclusive, completely. They've gone in-house with everything now, including photography and all of that. And I don't know what their price range is.
Fair. Totally fair. When you started out, for you and Bud, was the goal to do 100 plus weddings a year? Was it to do 15 or 20 and kind of just share the property? What were you aiming for when you started out?
Yeah, I think we didn't know what the top end should be. We wanted, we sunk everything into it. We sold our home, turned in our retirement, all that kind of stuff. And so what we're hoping for is to make enough money to, kind of replenish those things, not necessarily looking to get rich in any form of it, but looking to make a good income with the 10 years that we're really wanting to put into it. And so I think the number is larger than we kind of initially thought. Last year we hit about 65. And so I think what we'd like to see is 20 to 25 more weddings. And I think we'd be at an income level that we'd feel comfortable with. And it'd allow us to hire another events coordinator.
Got it.
I think would be just enhance what we've got already.
Okay, so you're really targeting then about 80, 85 events, just under 100, it sounds like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
There's no way we could sustain a whole lot more than that, I don't think, And here's the thing, Bud and I want to be at every event in some capacity. We love people. We fall in love with the bridal families. We want those relationships. And so we are highly involved in that. And it doesn't mean that we're there all day, but we certainly want to be there at close to hug everybody's neck and say, hey, did you have a good time? And all of that kind of thing. So we also want it to be workable for us as well.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I think it's interesting the level of staff and effort that it takes for a venue that does like 20 or 30 events versus a venue that does 60 to 70. And then you look at the venues that are doing like 100, 120, like to really get to that almost that speed limit where you're maxing out every single day. Plus, it takes a different staff load. Even though you might be doing more in sales, your expenses are going to rise quite a bit. So I think that's a pretty good sweet spot that you're aiming for. And
and I think at the end of the day, Bud and I like to step back. I mean, this too. We literally work 7 days a week. That's our pace. A little bit surprising to us, but our pace is a 7 day a week, and when we're working hard. So I think in the next couple of years, we'd like to see that come off a little bit.
100%. That makes sense. Brenda, the one thing that I didn't ask at the very beginning, which I should have totally asked, is when did you start? Like in what year?
We started in October of 19.
Oh, interesting time to start, right?
Yes.
So this is usually the question that I ask at the beginning, but I'm curious. How did you kind of weather that COVID storm? I mean, were you open for business or were you in construction during COVID?
Well, our first wedding was the second weekend of October. So I think it was the 12th of October was our very first wedding. And we had weddings October, November, and December, and a little bit of break in January. But then we had weddings. There is a miracle of fire marshals. So the fire marshal, and of course, you don't know this until you have to know it, but he set our capacity at 657. There's no way we would ever run an event. I mean, that's like people standing shoulder to shoulder, right? But what that allowed is when they said you have to cut to 50% or you have to cut down, you can only host 25%. Well, 25% of 657 is still 125-ish, so we could, throughout most of it, we could have those size of events. A lot of our brides and grooms, of course, balked at that. The best thing about it is because we didn't have a full schedule, we could hold those intimate ceremonies of maybe just 10 or 11, just the family, and then have their big parties later that fall. And it allowed us, again, that really sweet relationship where the couple was ready to get married and they wanted to get married, but then they could still have their party. And it helped us fall in love with the intimate size of that event. And then that's the reason why we opened our second venue. Our second venue is a micro venue, and it really is about the smaller events. So
I'm so glad you I'm so glad you mentioned it. You almost read my mind because I did want to wrap up with that and ask. I saw on the website like sister venue on the side to the right of your logo. And so tell me about that. Like, give me when did you start that? What inspired you to start that?
Oh my gosh, not in the 5-year plan. Let me tell you, we might be crazy, but we had driven by this old rundown home hundreds of times. And we had told each other, it has great bones. Somebody should love that house. It had 100-year-old oak tree, huge oak tree in the front. It was just, it just needed some love. And we were driving by it one day and there's a sign that said coming soon. And we're both like, stop the car. And so we went in and looked at it and really kind of took it apart in our heads and just thought this would just be the sweetest place. Built in 1914 on a double lot, all this beautiful heritage of growth and that. So we ended up buying that and taking all the internal walls out and creating a small micro event. We can hold up to 70 people there. Actually has a pool in the back. And it's a very sweet venue.
That's so neat because I expect the marketing that you do for one venue, if someone's guest count's a little bit lower, you can say, hey, we have this alternative venue. And so the marketing that you're doing is almost going 2 times as far as it would be if you just had the one venue.
And the biggest blessing that we can ask for is if we can have the rehearsal dinner of our couple the night before, maybe the bridesmaids stay overnight, and then we get to have the wedding the next day. And that's, for us, that's just a double bonus.
That's so cool. I love it. Brenda, I want to ask you the question that we ask all of our guests at the end, which is, it's really a double question, but it's what's your favorite part and what's your least favorite part of being a venue owner? And I'd love if we could start with the negative one, the least favorite part first, so we'll end on a high note.
I think every job has its hard parts, every single job. And there are some really hard parts, and the backstage stuff is hard, and you still have to show up every day. And those days when maybe people aren't particularly pleased with something, that's the hard part. And you're going to get that with every job that you do. So there are hard days. There just are.
So true. So the back of house, setting up and tearing down chairs, not getting things exactly how a bride or groom wanted them, that stuff.
There's no glamour in that.
It's true. Very true.
I will say we also live in horse country, and we just have a lot of flies. And there's no matter how hard you fight them, you still have them. So
classic. The flies are winning. Yeah. No, yeah, flies and dust. We have, fortunately, we don't have as many flies, but we have one of our properties is 110 acres or so, and it's so dusty. Yes. So dusty. But anyway, awesome. Well, Brenda, I'm curious about your favorite part, because I know you're passionate about doing this. You and Bud started this with a vision and a dream of how you wanted to kind of work together. So I'm curious, what is your favorite part?
I think my favorite part is being the beginning of somebody's life together. Occasionally I get to sneak in and listen to the vows, and that's always such a blessing. I'll never forget when my favorite grooms said, "You are the dream I didn't know to dream." And that's remained with me. People are in our building starting their lives together, and there's nothing better.
I love that. It's powerful. Brenda, thank you for coming on the Venue RX today. It's been great getting to know you a little bit more, getting to know about your venue. The second venue is called Manor 402. Okay, amazing. And then Oak and Ivy Venue is the other one. It's oakandivyvenue.com online. And then as far as Instagram or the best place to reach you, where should folks reach out if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, Instagram and Facebook are all the same, Oak and Ivy Venue, and you can email me at Brenda@Oak and Ivy Venue. So all of that's really easy.
Amazing. It's Oak, OAK, and AND, IVY.com. Venue. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Brenda, thanks for being on the show today. It was a blast.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was great to get to know you too.